sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. And you can catch me here Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Quick shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Let's go ahead and shout out the patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And we will be updating that because I know there's a couple of new ones that have not been added to the ticker just yet. But thank you guys so much for your support. Thank you so much. Want to go ahead and give quick shout outs to people in the chat. Let's start up at the top. Lots of comments. Oh boy, all the way up. Here we go. Actually, I wanted to start with thumbnail first. I'm sorry. We'll start with the thumbnail first, and then we'll get to chats. All right. So tonight we are discussing. So Matt Taibbi joins. I'm waiting to hear back from Matt. So I'll keep you posted on that. And then we're also going to discuss Briahna Joy Gray woke. If you have not seen this video, it has gone viral on Twitter. She did have a host that wrote a book about woke culture, but apparently didn't seem to define it well on the show. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about, I don't know if you've heard this story yet, but Norfolk Southern Railroad has actually been sued. They are now sued by the state of Ohio. So if you haven't heard about that, we're going to get into that story tonight and about the residents as well. And we're also going to finish up those Missouri ballot initiatives. So those are the topics for tonight. So I do want to go ahead and tell you something that happened really quickly, if I can get to that story. Give me just a second. Something I want you guys to know about. If you can help her, I think she would really appreciate it. Go ahead and share here. And I forgot to put this in there, but this was just sent my way. This particular story here. So this incident happened. Julia shared this. Let me go ahead and start at the top. She said, I usually don't post anything serious on my Twitter, but something happened Saturday night, and I just can't stomach the thought of this kid getting away with it. In the video below is at Mercy Hurst U student and is currently on the Hurst men's hockey team. So his name is Carson Briahna, and I want you to see this video clip here. This is disturbing, and then I'll show you how you can help the individual who was affected. So it appears to be a bar here, and there's a couple of gentlemen walking up the stairs, college kids hanging out. Now, so far, everything's fine. But I saw this and I was like, I have to share this because people need to help her. So here's a gentleman here in the white hat playing around in the wheelchair. This isn't his wheelchair. And then watch this. So I don't understand people. There was no need for that to happen. No need for that to happen. And I want to go ahead and share the rest of the thread so you know more about this, because I want to show you how you can help them. So the university did respond, and they said late this afternoon, Mercyhurst University became aware of a disturbing video in which one of our student athletes is seen pushing an unoccupied wheelchair down a flight of stairs at a local establishment. Our Office of Student Conduct and Department of Police and Safety are investigating. So she actually responded. Let me see if it'll show me that one. Here is the guy in the white hat. His father is Daniel Briere from the NHL. So this was the gentleman, Carson Briere. He was the one who pushed the wheelchair down the stairs. And apparently his father is an NHL player. So yeah. But what I wanted to let you know is there is a way to help the individual that's involved. They have started a GoFundMe, because this basically broke the chair when he pushed it down the flight of stairs. And they're asking for a new wheelchair. So they've raised over $8,811 so far. And it says, "Hi, my name is Julie. As you've already seen posted in the video on Twitter, a college student pushing someone's wheelchair down a flight of stairs. I'm starting this GoFundMe to help raise money towards a new wheelchair for the person. Any donation helps. Thank you." As listed, the organizer, Nathaniel Sanders, of this GoFundMe, I would like to thank everyone for the support. This was put together in such haste in response to people wanting to make donations that a lot of information was not added to the story and probably should have been added. The woman that the chair belongs to is Sydney Beans, a double amputee that needs the wheelchair to be mobile while she is learning to use her prosthetics. She wanted to remain anonymous during this until she filed a police report for the damages to the chair. The report was filed Wednesday morning and since made her identity known. The bar this incident happened at is Sullivan's Pub in Erie, Pennsylvania. Sullivan's is a bar that was built before ADA compliances were enacted and hence grandfathered in. And the reason that the restrooms are located at the bottom of the stairs. This is the reason that the chair was parked at the stop of the stairs. I personally physically carry her down the stairs anytime she has to use the restroom. So this is one of those bars, you guys, where they don't have handicap access in place. It's unfortunate, but if you can please help her out, this is the GoFundMe. And this is the young woman here. Here's a picture of her here. So she is a regular at this location. So Eric, if you can put the link to the GoFundMe in the chat, because wheelchairs are expensive, you guys. And sometimes insurance doesn't cover it, just being honest, or cover the full cost. So please, please, if you can help her, please help her out. All right, I do see Matt is here. Matt, whenever you're ready, if you can give me a thumbs up. All right, let me bring you in the stream. Hello.
Hello, Sabrina.
So nice to meet you in person or virtually.
Yep, whatever this is. Yes, nice to meet you. I'm a fan.
Oh, thanks so much. That means a lot coming from you.
No. How's the show going?
It is going. I was actually just telling everybody about this incident that happened in Erie, Pennsylvania. This girl's wheelchair was pushed down the stairs. It's ridiculous. Gosh, people have nothing else better to do.
Somebody pushed somebody down, a person in a wheelchair down the stairs?
She wasn't in the wheelchair, but her wheelchair was parked at the top of the stairs, and someone pushed her wheelchair down the stairs, so it broke her wheelchair.
Yikes.
There's no reason. No reason. It's ridiculous. All right, guys. My special guest tonight is Matt Taibbi. He's an author, journalist, and podcaster. He is also the New York Times bestseller list, or on the New York Times bestseller list. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a very busy person.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So I'm not sure if this is the first interview you've done since the subcommittee hearing of the Twitter files. Have you done one already?
I've done a few,
Okay.
not a lot, but it's there's been a lot of travel, and I'm also doing a new thread that's probably going to come out tomorrow. So those are very time consuming.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, we all saw the subcommittee hearing and the way that you were treated by particularly the Democrat politicians. And I'm curious to hear from you. How did that make you feel? And did you expect to be treated that way?
Um, I mean, I think as I said in the hearings, I spent a long time overseas, in Russia, and I knew reporters who really suffered, who were beaten up, hit with crowbars, and even a couple who were murdered. So, being picked on in a congressional hearing, on the scale of things that can happen to you isn't so bad. I think it was embarrassing. I was expecting to be attacked, but I think the way they behaved and the nature of the attacks was kind of insulting and showed the total lack of interest in the subject matter, which was a little bit shocking to me, I think.
I think so too. Do you think if, let's say it was the other way around, and let's say that the information that was reported by the Twitter files was more, I guess, critical about the left, so to speak, like most of the information that was discovered was against the left in reference to censorship. Do you think that the Democrat politicians on that committee would have been a little bit more tolerant, so to speak?
Well, honestly, I think if you read the Twitter files, the overwhelming majority of the stuff that we're writing about isn't really about one party or the other. Most of it is about the intelligence services, and if you look at the focus of a lot of these lists that they were giving to Twitter, they're all over the place. They target people on both the left and the right. One person that I talked to described it as counterterrorism to counterpopulism. So it's really very dependent upon what country you're looking at. In the United States, they're more worried about Trump supporters because the populist right is more of a threat, I think, to the authorities. But in Europe, Africa, South America, these groups are, anti-disinformation groups are looking more at the left. So I do find the lack of interest in this a little bit puzzling on the part of the Democrats because, well, I guess really not, because it's the real left that's being targeted, right? Not the Democratic Party left. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously if there were emails about Donald Trump behaving badly, that probably even a couple of those that would dominate the story, I think.
That's right. This is a big part of partisan politics. So there was a congresswoman, I believe she's actually a delegate. From what I understand, she can't really vote, so to speak, Congresswoman Plaskett. And she continued to ask you, who gave you access to these emails. I saw that the video that Orf made. It was really funny. But can you explain to people, I know you did explain to them that you cannot reveal, the identity of your source. Can you explain to everyone why that is incredibly important, why you can't reveal that type of information, just as a journalist in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit embarrassing because this isn't one of those situations where you have a source who's like at the front lines of a war, whose life is at stake. It's not exactly a Sherlock Holmes mystery what's going on with this story. But as as a reporter, I made an arrangement with a source, actually sources. The attribution for the Twitter files stories is sources at Twitter. And it's not my arrangement to break. This is just sort of basic journalistic ethics 101. If I wanted to break it, I'd have to call the people in the middle of the hearing and say, can I do this? But even that is very questionable. Like, a government official should never be asking somebody to break their deal, especially where it's irrelevant here. Like, the only reason you would want a legitimate reason you'd want to know what somebody's source is, would be to try to determine whether the story is more or less accurate. But here you're looking at documents, so that's not really an issue. I think honestly, people like Delegate Plaskett and Sylvia Garcia the congresswoman from Texas. I think they just don't know that it's not cool to go there with a reporter. I mean, if I were to answer that question, it would be setting a very bad precedent for other reporters. No matter how silly people think it is, it would be very bad to do that. And they were totally out of line going there and didn't really know it.
Were you surprised that it appears that some of them actually didn't do their research? For example, I know Congresswoman Plaskett said so-called journalists. Garcia obviously didn't know what Substack was. Like, it was kind of revealing to me. I was like, did they do any research to prep for this hearing? Was that surprising to you?
A little bit. I mean, I've covered Congress enough to know kind of how this works. The members of Congress have a tough job. Most of the time they're flying in for really 3 days a week. They come in on Tuesday, they leave on Thursday, and they go from hearing to hearing. And aides hand them cheat sheets, and they don't really have time to read all the material most of the time. So, in some cases that's more important than others. But actually, this is sort of an interesting question, because one of the reasons that Twitter, Facebook, and Google they were originally dragged to the Hill in 2017, and the Senate Select Intelligence Committee had to invite all these outside experts like New Knowledge and Graphica and Johns Hopkins in, is because the members didn't know how to talk to tech people. They didn't understand how tech worked. They didn't know what a post was or how things went viral. So they had to hire experts to tell them about this. But they were the same people that they were interviewing in these hearings, which made it kind of a feedback loop. And that's kind of what you saw on display in this hearing. Like, Congresswoman Garcia is asking me, she seemed not to understand that Twitter was something that you just post to. Like, she thought it was like an editorial office that I had to send copy to. And there was a moment where she asked me, did you attribute, but you just said you have to attribute all your sources to Twitter. And you can see that I paused because I literally don't know what she's trying to say in that moment. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think the members don't really understand this world very well. And as a result, you get a lot of totally incoherent testimony.
Did you know who the committee members were going to be before you arrived, or did you find out when you got there?
No, I knew. I mean, you can see who's on the subcommittee. Unfortunately, I didn't do as much homework as I should have, because in the moment, especially when I was talking to Dan Goldman from New York, when he asked me that question about do you or do you not agree with a pair of indictments? I had forgotten that he was a U.S. attorney, and so for him to ask a person whether or not you would agree with an indictment, a lawyer should never ask that question. So I should have said that. But I didn't know who was going to be on the committee. Yeah.
That's interesting. I was kind of surprised to see Debbie Weiserman Schultz on that committee, because it was kind of laughable to me, and I just thought to myself, like, I sincerely hope she's not trying to question anyone's integrity, giving her former past with the DNC. So I was kind of surprised to see her on that committee. But I think that both you and Michael handled it very well, because from what I saw, like, both of you seem pretty calm and patient. I know, like, for me, I listened to it first and then I watched it later on. And as I was listening to it, I was like, there's no way I could sit through this. I would just have to, like, get up and say, this line of questioning is ridiculous, because I felt like they would ask you a question, and then when you would try to answer the question, they would speak over you.
Yeah, I had been warned about that look, they're going to reclaim their time. They're not going to let you say anything but yes or no. And so I knew that was coming. But until you're actually there and you see the cameras rolling, and, every second feels like a very pregnant pause and all that, it's disconcerting when people don't let you answer a question. And it was upsetting, at times. The whole business about, did you make money from this? I actually should have gotten angrier about that, because I got caught up in whether or not that was true, and didn't think about the bigger picture, which is that you have no right to ask me whether or not I'm making money on this. Like, it's totally legitimate for a journalist to make money, and you wouldn't ask that question of someone from the New York Times, like, or the Washington Post. Did you get a book deal out of this? Like, they would never ask you that. So I think I fumbled that part of it. And but yeah, no, I mean, look, there was another hearing of this same subcommittee that wasn't televised about a week before this, with FBI whistleblowers, where they basically did exactly the same thing to the witnesses. They asked them about money, they asked them about their motives, they asked them, who their sources were. It's the same playbook. They're just trying to smear you every time.
Wow. Do you think looking back on it, because it seemed like they do have some type of resentment towards Elon Musk because of like the Twitter files and just him like purchasing Twitter to begin with, do you think they're going to ask Elon Musk to testify?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that they would. I think that's a situation where both parties would probably. Well, I think Elon would probably do it, actually, now that I think about it. But there are probably too many unknowns in that equation for them. Clearly, I think it's hard to really put into words how much Elon buying Twitter upset the apple cart of this thing that had been built. Before he arrived, the government and all these NGOs, a lot of them are state funded, and agencies like DHS, CISA, the Global Engagement Center, and all the tech companies, all the major ones, had agreed essentially on a cross-platform censorship arrangement that, among other things, involved a sort of hidden subsidy for certain kinds of NGOs, where some of the bigger ones are given free access to fire hose data for all these platforms. So when Elon Musk showed up and he is sort of opting out of this system and also potentially threatening to turn off this free access to data, it really screwed up the whole thing. And that's an undercurrent to all of this that probably needs to be explained at some point, that just by virtue of not going along in the same way the other companies have, he's sort of upset something that has been in motion for 5 or 6 years now.
That's interesting. I want to get into like the process of the Twitter files. Now, I know I'm going to try not to ask you questions that people have already asked you. I know there's some questions you've been asked multiple times before, but in reference to the process, I think that some people saw this, and more so Democrats saw this process, and they said, well, how come it seems like most of the information that's coming out is critical of the Democratic Party? Like, for example, there was information that was reported about Adam Schiff, but I think we all kind of know like how Adam Schiff operates, because he was a big Russiagator. Like, so to me, like Adam Schiff, like that wasn't surprising. But some people who are Democrats, they saw the information that was coming out and they said, well, wait a minute, where's the criticism, of the Republican Party here? And some of those people have gone on to smear you now as right wing. So first and foremost, I want to ask, are you surprised that some of the people who praise some of your previous work, such as Griftopia, are you surprised that some of those like journalists and commentators are now buying into this type of propaganda that someone who criticizes or critiques the Democratic Party is now right wing?
I'm not surprised. It's just a fact of the landscape now. What's interesting, you mentioned Griftopia. Back when I was covering the financial crisis, I was a big fan of Barack Obama when I was covering him on the campaign trail. in 2007 and 2008. I really liked him. I thought he was very, smart. I wrote a lot of really, really sort of gushing positive articles about him. And then he got elected and the financial crisis happened. I got assigned to that. And immediately I had to do this very negative story about these connections that he had with Citigroup, and that he had put all of his old friends, a lot of whom worked at that bank, in charge of his economic transition, which, affected the bailout. And I was praised by other journalists for going after both sides back then. Like, that was considered a mark of integrity at the time to be, look, he wrote positively about him here, and then now, the story's different a year later, and that's the way you're supposed to do the job. Now with the Twitter files, I think, we're just in a different landscape where everything has to be right, left coded, and it's not even so much about the material as about the messenger now. So if the story is not positive for this or that political party, they will just immediately assault you as being an agent of that, of the other side, which is unfortunate in this instance, because I think a lot of what happened with the Twitter files was kind of an accident. Like, I was really not looking in either direction. I was doing searches for like FBI, DHS, stuff like that, and just sort of incidentally saw these things about Angus King or Adam Schiff. But people thought that it was slanted toward one side or the other.
So I think that's important for people to understand. It's not like you sat down and said, okay, let me look up information about Adam Schiff per se. These were things that came up along the way as you were searching for information about government agencies, from what I understand. How do you decide? I know you decided to look for like FBI and for things about Russia. How do you decide? How do you go about making that decision, like which topics you're going to look for?
Well, the original decision to look at the Hunter Biden instance was mainly because of the interview with Mark Zuckerberg that he had done with Joe Rogan. And, he had also testified to Congress about that there had been some guidance from the FBI. So I thought, if we looked at the internal correspondence around that incident with Twitter, that we might get to answer the question of like, well, how does that system work? Unfortunately, we didn't really learn a whole lot, among other things, possibly because the former FBI general counsel was sifting that first batch of emails. But roughly a week later, when we finally got access to kind of unfettered searches, we immediately started seeing this flood of stuff where you would see at the top, flagged by DHS, flagged by FBI, whatever it was. And then you see, names of agents or email addresses of certain people. And I immediately recognized, as a reporter does, that this is a big story, and that's what I wanted. So the criticism that I didn't, for instance, go look for the Bernie Bro stuff or whatever else is legitimate. Like, I made a conscious choice to go after something else because this is time consuming. And I thought that I was, I don't know how many bites at the apple I'm going to get. I want to do this one first before I look at anything else. But no, that's what I was doing. We all kind of felt the same way, though, by the way, in that room. Once we started seeing those emails, we didn't really look at much else after the shadow banning story. That was really it. We were all looking in the same direction.
I think the Hunter Biden laptop story is incredibly important because it's not just about the censorship on Twitter. We all have to go back to when Glenn Greenwald decided to leave The Intercept. Remember what that was about. They wouldn't allow him to publish that story. The New York Post somehow was able to get it out there. It was on Twitter. And of course, there were agencies stepping in saying, suppress this story or censor this story. And the reason why I bring up that particular story is because I look back and I wonder if that would have had an impact on voters. And I'm curious to see what you think about that. If the American voters knew about this information before the 2020 election, do you think that would have swayed them in any way, shape, or form?
Maybe. I mean, it's hard to quantify, but it's certainly a dramatic difference in two different elections, right? Because you had then you had a leak that involved true information in 2016, and that was damaging. I mean, I don't know how you quantify it, but certainly I think it probably did some damage, especially with Bernie voters. I was a Bernie voter, and I remember reading that stuff, and I still voted for Hillary that year, but I didn't feel good about it. And you know, I think the Hunter Biden laptop story, if it had been followed up on the way normally it would have been maybe 20 years ago, where like a whole cavalry of reporters descended on the different aspects of it and reported out, you know, interviews with Tony Bobulinski and that sort of thing, it might have had an impact on the election. It's hard to say, but certainly stepping in and blocking that story, you know, the two of the biggest media distributors in the country, stopping the story is a historically significant moment, and it's been depressing to see other reporters not see that, because they're focused on the left-right aspect of it.
In reference to Joe Biden, have you seen anything so far? I'm not sure if you've searched for this yet, but have you seen anything so far in reference to censorship or suppression of Tara Reid's story involving Joe Biden? And I asked that question because I have noticed if I go onto YouTube and I search for Tara Reid's channel, she has a YouTube channel, and she's also on Rumble. If I search for Tara Reid's channel, her channel doesn't appear. What does appear are all the interviews that she did in reference to the Joe Biden incident that she had. So I was curious in reference to Twitter too. Have you seen anything in reference to that?
I haven't, and we would need to do a search of that to probably find that out. Although it's not always fruitful. Like I tried to find out about Julian Assange's page, and this is complicated. There's a whole bunch of different systems that we can search. One of them is called like the PV2 viewer page, where you can see the incidents that happen on that person's account. But a lot of the historical material, you're not actually able to access in the same way you are with an email. So those stories are actually harder to dig out than something that the executives talked about in an email. So I haven't seen her name anywhere. And then with Biden, we've only had a few limited glimpses into things that either came from his White House or from his campaign liaison. We have seen a bunch of things involving, asking them to remove like parody accounts that pick on Biden and stuff like that. But apart from that, no.
In reference to foreign policy, so this is a big one for us. Same thing with YouTube. I noticed there's certain countries, if I talk about them, it is suppressed more on YouTube. So I'm curious about this in reference to Twitter too. Have you seen any type of censorship in reference to Palestine, Yemen, or Syria?
Palestine, Yemen, or Syria? Syria, I think so. So to clarify one thing, like the government is very focused on China, Russia, and Iran as what they call foreign malign threat actors. So whenever you see lists of accounts that they want to get rid of, they're usually asserting that it's either Iranian disinformation or Russian disinformation or Chinese disinformation. But I have seen some Syrian accounts that they claimed were Russian disinformation. A few also that they claimed were Iranian disinformation, but I haven't published any of those yet. Obviously, Palestine, it's always like the canary in the coal mine for new content moderation techniques. And I'd probably need to go back further in history, to 2014, 2015 to find it, because a lot of the probably 99% of the moderation on Twitter is done by algorithm. So until you find that moment, it's very hard to detect what they're, where the moment of origin is with a moderation decision. And that was probably a long time ago.
Okay. To add on to the Russia piece, for those who are not aware, and I know some of you watching are not on Twitter at all, I totally understand. But
happy people.
I know a while back, they decided to make this switch on Twitter where some of the people that I know that were hosts for RT had their own RT shows. All of a sudden, one day they woke up and Twitter put this tag underneath their name that says Russian affiliated, like content. And I don't know if they're being suppressed as well, but it does send like a flag to people. For instance, if they do tweet about something in reference to like Russia and Ukraine, the average viewer who's not as well versed in foreign policy and mainly just pays attention to mainstream media references about Russia and Ukraine, it's like automatically a switch goes off and they say, oh, that's a Russian affiliated account, so I shouldn't believe anything that they say. Do you know if there is like suppression or censorship of those accounts?
There definitely is, yeah. And I've seen and I've published a couple of the lists that the Foreign Influence Task Force, which is it's a joint group headed by the FBI, the DHS, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They're responsible for funneling these big lists of names to the platforms, and some of them contain names of current and former, RT affiliated people. There's a woman named Rachel Blevins whose name I saw on one of those lists recently. That was actually, believe it or not, I think in connection with the Iran disinformation. But yeah, no, anybody who has any kind of connection to Sputnik or RT, you'll see them not just on lists, but also in these specialized reports that the State Department sends from what's called the Global Engagement Center. Just today, I was looking at a report from the GEC about Russia COVID disinformation in Italy, and they included the former prime minister of Italy and the secretary of Italy's Democratic Party, who's sort of like the Bernie of Italy. They were both listed as highly connective Russia-linked accounts in this report. So I showed that to an Italian reporter, and she's like, "Do you know who these people are?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I'm sorry." But yeah, no, they're very, very aggressive with putting those labels on people. And what's key about this is that they're not making links to things like, this account retweeted at exactly the same time as this bot account over here, which is like a real forensic analysis. What they're doing is they're looking at things like, did they retweet the same stories? Do they have the same opinions about things? Do their belief systems overlap? And that is scary because that's much more like, guilt by association than it is, detective work.
Right. I understand. The NAFO accounts as well. They're another one. Like at first I thought these were just like bots, But then people explain to me like, no, those are actual people, and it usually says that they're in Langley, Virginia. But they heavily like attack people on Twitter, even for people who are just saying like there should be peace between Russia and Ukraine. They attack those people too. And it just seems like they are very effective of getting other accounts removed, but the NAFO accounts aren't removed. Do you know if have you heard anything about that in reference to, is there going to be something done about that? Because I know like other people have tagged Elon before and they've said these accounts are like going after people and they're just getting people taken down, but they're not being removed.
No, I don't know anything about that, and I really, really want to. That's one of the big frustrations for me about the Twitter files. Is I would really love to get to the bottom of domestic fake accounts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, starting with the anti-Bernie bro accounts. You know, I remember in 2016. There was this moment in time where you woke up one morning and it felt like half the people on Twitter were fake. And it's like, it's been that way ever since. The NAFO accounts are a great example. Yes, we know a little bit about fake accounts abroad, right? Like Li Fong did a thread about how the Pentagon creates fake accounts in foreign languages.
Yeah.
For unbelievable reasons, like if we drone some village, if we want the locals to read that not that many kids were killed and stuff like that, so we create fake accounts to do that. But the issue of fake accounts here in the States, we know it happens, but I haven't been able to find the key to unraveling that story yet, and I don't really know why. That's been tough to figure out.
Interesting. I know that when we talk about the government agencies like the FBI, CIA, etc. I felt like when the Twitter files were first released, it went from people saying, whoa, they really did try to like suppress the Hunter Biden story. They really did try to get rid of it. Had already been decided they were going to remove Donald Trump before the incident took place in January. I felt like it went from that to people just focusing on, oh, well, where's the information about the right, like the left-right divide? And I feel like sometimes people are not looking at the bigger picture. And what people should be focused on is the fact that you have these government agencies that had overreach and they were trying to silence people, and not just on Twitter, but also on Facebook. And I'd be curious to see the YouTube files because I'm pretty sure I already know independent media is suppressed, but I'd be curious to see like what's happening on YouTube. Like who are they going out of their way to suppress? But are you disappointed by that, so to speak, that people are not really focusing on the larger issue here, which is the fact that these government agencies overplayed their hand here and a social media platform a lot of us just consider to be a town square?
Yeah, I'm very frustrated by that because, again, which party it affects more today, the Republicans or the Democrats, is kind of irrelevant next to the larger question of, do they have a bureaucracy in place to control narratives across multiple platforms? And they do. Like, we're the next thread we're going to put out is about this system that they created to respond to COVID, which created a single digitized ticketing system for 7 major platforms. And they had a set of guidelines that, among other things, defined as vaccine misinformation, true stories that promote hesitancy. So it's not even that they're going after disinformation. They don't believe, they actually say this in different places, they don't believe that ordinary people can make decisions without faith and authority. So they are targeting as a narrative strategy any stories that undermine the public's faith in officials like Anthony Fauci, that kind of thing. And that is unbelievably dangerous. The idea that they can have the technology to do that. Again, it doesn't matter what the party is in power. The fact that you can have would-be competitors all joining in and engaging in basically a group censorship effort and doing narrative targeting against certain kinds of stories that might be true. And just a quick pointer, like I got the shot. I'm not like an anti-vax person. I don't. One of the reasons I wasn't interested in the vaccine story from the beginning is because I just don't know a whole lot about it. I don't get spun up about it. But the fact that they are actively suppressing true stories about, for instance, somebody who dies after they get the shot. So that happens. Somebody will have an adverse reaction. Like they'll get a blood disorder or have a heart attack or myocarditis or whatever, and the family member will go on Facebook, and then it will become a local news story, and these people want to edit that out because they think that people can't be mature enough to handle it. Now that's wrong on so many levels. I can't even count where to start with that, because what happens if there is really a problem with these vaccines, and you're suppressing that, and now you have fewer people investigating it. People aren't getting to make informed decisions. You are also targeting behaviors, like people saying that it's a good thing to investigate for yourself. They don't like it when they see that. They see that as an indicator of misinformation as tendencies and that sort of thing. Like, all this stuff is incredibly dangerous. It's Orwellian, and all this childish emphasis on, Donald Trump tried to get Chrissy Teigen banned. I'm sure he tried to get a whole bunch of people banned, but it's, next to this stuff, it's child's play. I think people don't understand that.
I think people have to understand that just because you don't like the information that was revealed from the Twitter files doesn't mean the information is incorrect.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nobody that I know of has really said that it's incorrect. They've suggested that it's been slanted, or that, that you're only seeing one side of the story. But I intentionally picked things that were in themselves self-contained news stories. Like, no matter what other context you include, a list that's compiled by the Atlantic Council of 40,000 people they say are Iranian disinformation agents, that includes a whole bunch of ordinary Americans. That's a newsworthy story. No matter what else you add to that, it's all, it's true, right? So yeah, that's frustrating. Like, people are not engaging with the material because they're upset about a really tertiary, temporary now problem, and not looking, even a year into the future.
Agreed. Another thing I wanted to add too, for people looking for, I would say, censorship of the left. If I'm comparing it to YouTube, I would imagine that the Twitter algorithm is probably already set in place to censor a lot of the topics that are favorable to the left anyway. For example, a lot of the things that we talk about, anti-war or policing. Policing is a big one over on YouTube. I notice certain topics I cover, they will suppress those more. Is it safe to say that maybe the Twitter algorithm may work in the same way, that because of the topics we tend to talk about on the left, Twitter is more likely, or the algorithm is more likely, not to promote those topics?
Absolutely. And I know this because in 2018, I was one of the first reporters to write about the topic of platforms like Facebook deciding to wipe out accounts. If you remember, there was a funny little story in the fall of 2018 about what they called a purge of accounts.
Yep.
Facebook announced that it had eliminated 800 accounts accused of coordinated inauthentic activity. That was the phrase they used. They had been advised by the Digital Forensic Research Lab, the same one that's funded by the Global Engagement Center, which is a State Department entity technically, but it was actually founded by a bunch of intelligence agencies. Anyway, they advised Facebook to get rid of 800 accounts, and they were mostly small accounts, but a lot of them were police brutality monitoring sites like Cop Watch. Like I think there was another one called Cop Block. Anti-Media was another one. I forget the other. There were a whole bunch of these small sites. Some of them were also just sort of normal pro-democratic small businesses. Like they were blue-leaning Facebook pages that had, followings of about 150,000, 200,000 readers. They were just sort of eliminated. But you're absolutely right. A lot of those topics were kind of traditional lefty topics more than anything else. They were sort of protest, fracking, environmental issues, police brutality, and they see that as an indicator of inauthentic activity. Why? There's a very interesting rational explanation for that, because channels like RT naturally gravitate towards any subjects that make America look bad. So what do? They highlight stories of police brutality, banking corruption, environmental disasters, things that the left, income inequality, that's another really big one. So a lot of the early targets of this stuff were these kind of small sites that were concerned with niche issues that had been retweeted on RT. And you see this in the intelligence community assessment that concluded that the Russians interfered for Donald Trump. There's a whole list of topics that they say are RT unnaturally amplified, and it's police brutality, fracking, banking corruption, stuff like that. So yes, I'm sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but yeah, a lot of that stuff is probably algorithmically dealt with, and if with enough time, we will find it.
Was there anything that you found so far that's been surprising to you?
I would say the cravenness of some of the letters asking for things to be taken down. I haven't seen the Trump letters. I assume they're utterly ridiculous, but the ones that came from Schiff's office. Again, the people who work in congressional offices, especially like the Intelligence Committee, a lot of them have legal backgrounds. So to put down on paper, I would like you to remove journalist X, who happens to be covering the story that annoys me most right now. That was pretty shocking to me. Like, I didn't expect to see that. And the most recent stuff that we've been looking at, where they're giving guidance and they're openly saying true material, like they're using the word true. That's unusual. Normally, these bureaucrats, you can see when they're talking to each other, they use a code. So like when the FBI wants to take something down, they'll say, for your consideration, we're going to pass along these accounts which may violate your terms of service, but they don't say take this down. All right, but in these cases with the vaccine thing, they're actually just coming out and saying take down true stuff, which is surprising.
So there will be more files released. I know you said that there's another one that's about to drop, so I'm excited for that. I know you said that you had to go through like thousands of emails. Are there going to be any more journalists that are going to, help you like go through those emails? Because I don't know how you did it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I've got a team of people now who are looking through everything. We're going to be releasing a report probably in a couple of weeks that is going to give people a sort of a starting, like a starter's guide to all the censorship programs, including the public agencies and the private NGOs and where they're getting their money. So we're gonna try to map that out. That's what I hired a team to do, and also those people are all scanning the Twitter files that we have for any other stories that we might have missed. But they're mostly in the same universe. Like, it's the more we look, the more we're finding the same themes over and over again, which is about increased coordination between all of these different NGOs, and more money being thrown into this area. Like, this is a major new area of defense contracting or intelligence contracting, in the same way that like counterterrorism was in the early 2000s. So that's what we're seeing a lot of in these letters, is like this new sort of gold rush full of would-be experts who are trying to cash in on this whole thing.
How far back, or if you're allowed to say, how far back can you go, Matt?
I don't even know. I haven't tried. I mean, the earliest searches that I did were 2016 and 2017, and I was looking for something specific back then. And so okay. I don't know. We haven't tried to go earlier. If we get the chance, we will. I don't know how. I honestly don't know how this is affecting the company and how much of a tolerance they have for this to continue. So, but if they let us keep doing it, we're going to keep doing it.
Someone mentioned in the chat, Aaron, is Aaron Mate helping you too?
He is. Yeah. He's, let's just say there's a piece of the files that goes directly to an issue, a Russiagate issue that he's been very interested in for years. And so, we wanted, I wanted to give him the opportunity to dig into that some. I think it should be a really good story when he's done.
How do you feel about free speech overall? I mean, like the past year and a half, it seems like the Democratic Party seems to be more pro-censorship, and the Republican Party is giving people the impression that they're pro-free speech. Although I think this is just a partisan thing right now. Like right now, the president is a Democrat. It could change if the president becomes a Republican. Do you feel like the Democratic Party has started to walk away from free speech?
I do. I'm depressed by that. I think it's tied to another phenomenon that's been kind of underreported, which is the change in the demographics of the Democratic Party. If you look at the 50 richest congressional districts, I think 41 of them are Democrats now. That number would have been more like 60-40 in the other direction in the early 90s. So the Democrats have become kind of the party of wealthier, urban, coastal voters. And I think you're right that the Republicans are being totally opportunistic about the speech issue. However, I'm not so sure that their voters are, because actual like working class people have always traditionally in the past been more insistent on their speech rights and more vocal about it than people in the upper class who believe that they maybe should be a vanguard for the rest of society. So the Trump voters who are bellowing about elites who are trying to censor their speech, that does make a little bit of political sense to me. But yeah, obviously it's very depressing because I grew up in a household that was very geared toward the speech issue. My mother was an attorney, and taught me a lot about civil liberties when I was a kid, and so obviously having a father in journalism, so it's been very depressing to see the turnaround on those issues, which is I don't know. What do you like? What's your take on that? Like, why do you think that's happened in the last, or do you think it's happened?
I think it is happening. It's really sad. Like, I know we hear these talking points from Fox News that the Democratic Party is moving further to the left. I disagree with that. I think the Democratic Party has actually moved further towards the right. Even when we look at issues like policing, like they have a lot of virtue signaling after these incidents happen of police brutality. But then at the end of the day, they say we're going to give more money to the police. So I feel like where are those revolutionary voices? Like, where is like an old school Angela Davis? Like, where is the Fred Hampton? Where is the Malcolm X? Like, I feel like we don't have those voices anymore. I also do feel like some people may be afraid to be that voice because a lot of our revolutionary heroes were assassinated, like, so to speak. So, and that's another thing that we talk about the government agencies. Now more has come out about that. Like, Malcolm X's family has announced that they filed a lawsuit against the FBI and the NYPD Blue, or NYPD. These are things that I kind of felt did happen, but I didn't have evidence. And now there's evidence to prove that these government agencies killed our revolutionary leaders. So I think that people are afraid to have that voice today because they kind of see it as a death sentence, so to speak. And so I think that when those leaders were killed off, I think neoliberalism kind of came in and took hold of revolutionary fighters. And I think people started to think that the Democratic Party is going to be the one to save us, instead of listening to what MLK said when he said, be wary, of those political leaders, that you have to fight on the outside.
Yeah, whenever they bring up MLK in the press, it's always the pre-1967 version of him, like before he turned anti-war and, before the Riverside speech and all that. Yeah, like, and the funny thing about this Twitter file stuff is that it's very similar to stories like the COINTELPRO story, Operation Mockingbird, where you had government, or the CIA family jewel story from the 1975, which was about government agencies being very concerned about sort of underclass rebellion and trying to figure out ways to conduct surveillance and to suppress the speech of those people. Obviously, back then, like, assassinating people like Fred Hampton is much more extreme than removing an account. But in the digital age, they have other ways of dealing with these movements, which are bloodless, but they're also scary, I think, in a different way. So it's depressing that people don't see that link.
So true. I have a couple more questions for you, Matt. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. You're from Massachusetts. So we have that in common. I've been here for a little over 11 years.
Whereabouts?
I am right outside of north of Boston. But I used to live in Somerville. I lived in Cambridge. I did the Boston thing where you hopped around different neighborhoods, like a new year, you do a different neighborhood. But yeah, I lived in Southie for a short period of time. It's very different today. Southie is very much gentrified. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that until they come here. They think it's like The Departed, and it's not.
Departed.
I know. I know, but like, I was going to ask you about some of the local wins that we've had in Massachusetts. I've been trying to encourage people to try to see what they can do locally in their state so that they're not just disappointed when these things don't happen on the national level in reference to progressive policies. So like in Massachusetts, like we just passed the millionaire's tax, which is something Bernie and Elizabeth Warren kind of wanted. We've also, legalized marijuana a couple years ago. So we also have the cannabis shops that were implemented. I feel like there's been a lot of wins that have happened here on the state level that did not happen nationally. The $15 minimum wage, we also passed that like years ago. What's your opinion about people trying to get these wins on the state level and not just being focused on national politics?
Well, I obviously I think that's key. I think what we see, like these Twitter file stories, have me lying awake at night, because what I see are sort of hyper empowered federal politicians who are trying to consolidate as much decision-making authority into their own hands as quickly as they can. So having politically active local populations enact local ordinances that make it tough for federal agencies to do that is important. But the problem is that people are very focused on the national, politics in the national level. It's kind of, I feel kind of the same way I do about like local journalism. The more you can empower local journalists, the better, because they tend to have real beats. They tend to actually know what they're talking about. They're interviewing people in the actual neighborhoods. They're not just clicking on links. They do a better job, traditionally, than a lot of the national reporters do, or they do a more pure version of the job. But the tendency in the last 20 years or so has been financially they've been wiped out. So I wish more of the NGOs and the political campaigns were more locally focused. I think that probably would be a good thing. The Republicans understood that in the early 2000s and spent a lot of money on groups like ALEC, and I don't think the Democrats countered in the same way, which was unfortunate. Which is why we have a lot of like deregulatory policies that had they got passed at the state level that are going to take forever to unwind. So sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but.
Oh, no worries. So I want to show you something that this was announced recently in reference to the new banking crisis. So former Congressman Barney Frank, it was just announced that he's joining the board of Signature Bank, and Signature Bank just announced they had a collapse. And his response was, the reason why he's joining the board is because I need to make some money. They're just they're very open with it now, like not even trying to hide it. And I was going to ask you, like, if you look back at what you found about the 2008 housing crisis and the corruption within the banking industry, compared to what you see happening right now with Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, do you see any similarities when you compare it to 2008?
Oh, absolutely. The game with 2008, it's the same story over and over again on Wall Street. Like, you find some corner of the financial universe that's unregulated, and everybody sets up basically a gambling shop there, and they trade in products that the government doesn't really monitor. And before you know it, everybody's leveraged to the hilt, and there's too much risk in the system. And then eventually it breaks, and there's catastrophic losses, and the government has to step in and bail everybody out. And that's happened over and over and over again, dating back to the mid 80s. You had the S&L crisis. That you can actually go back further than that to look like the bankruptcy of New York. Then there was the stock, the internet stock craze in the mid 90s was the same thing. Then you had mortgage-backed securities, which was the same, another version of the same thing. And crypto and tech stocks and dark pools, it's all kind of the same stuff. The irony of Barney Frank saying that, I mean, I covered the Dodd-Frank bill, and I had to spend probably 6 months of my life going to Washington to cover the formation of that bill. And they worked incredibly hard to make sure that we didn't pass really, really simple laws that would have created transparency in all sorts of markets, like mortgages. They never got around even to doing something for crypto that would have made sense. But that's how you get rich members of the Financial Services Committee. They all retire and they take jobs on the boards of banks, and it's the same thing as somebody who works at the SEC in the enforcement wing. They work for a little while, then they leave and they sign the equivalent of an NBA contract, with some defense firm or a bank or whatever. And that's why nothing ever happens that's positive in terms of reforming this stuff. So Barney Frank, I actually, again, I'm from Massachusetts too. Like, I kind of like him. He's funny. He has a reputation of being a jovial guy who will get along with anybody, even on the other side. Like, he's personable, but as a symbol of what's wrong with the system, he's pretty prominent to me. Like, and there are some others on the other side too, but yeah, that's the problem with this system, is that it's now become normal for politicians to leave office and try to monetize their experience. We don't think of it as crazy anymore when the Clintons or whoever, when they do that, and that's depressing. Just to end on a quick note, like I'm friends with Dennis Kucinich. He's still living in the same house. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a guy who grew up poor. He lived in a car for a while. He was in Congress. He did it because he's a public servant. He doesn't care about, there's no end game with a person like that. And how many of those politicians are there? Not many, and that's what you're saying about where are those revolutionaries now? Or like, where are those people you can trust? They're not there anymore. So it's depressing.
That's a good point. This is a good question here. Thanks so much, Chris. I agree with Matt that the government is using Twitter to censor speech is more important, but could we also learn how the DNC used Twitter to screw primary voters by censoring speech and algorithmic suppression? Can you ask Matt about this?
That's a good question. I would like to get around to that, especially the 2016 story. I vividly remember, the sudden flowering of attacks against Sanders. They were different in 2016 than in 2020 when he was being linked to Russians and other things. But yeah, I'd like to get into that. I haven't really done that, but it would certainly be worth looking at if they give us an opportunity to do it.
Awesome. All right, Matt, 2 more questions for you. What do you feel the future will look like for independent journalists, given a lot of the censorship that's going on now?
I actually think the future for independent journalists is pretty good right now. The last 2 or 3 years has shown that you can't fake trust, and the business model for the media is based on the relationship you have with audiences. If audiences don't believe you, then they will go to somebody else, which is why MSNBC, CNN, and to like Fox also, like they're also in some to varying degrees they're struggling, because this model of like kind of feeding people what they want to hear isn't doing as well as it used to. So that's why like Joe Rogan's show is doing really well. Substack is doing well. And I actually have a lot of hope for it. I think the one problem that we haven't really figured out yet is how to pay for investigative journalism. Like it's, this idea of having somebody spend 2 months investigating something and then doing a report on that, that's pretty hard to monetize because you need to create content all the time, as you know. And so that's one thing I worry about. But apart from that, I think it's doing well.
Awesome. All right. And this question for you, I've asked everyone who's a journalist or commentator that's come on this question recently. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about becoming an independent journalist?
Oh, this is a good one. I love this question. Move overseas. And there's like 5 different reasons why. But if you're thinking about going into the media, the absolute worst thing you can do is to try to move up the chain by getting an internship at New York Magazine or the New York Times. Work some job, wait tables, do whatever you have to do, work construction, save up a little bit of money, move to some place in the world where it's cheap and you can live for a year, on not that much money, and be a stringer for wire services. That will accomplish a couple of things. Number one, you'll really see the world. You'll see America from a new perspective. You'll learn a foreign language. You'll have a really interesting life, and you'll learn the job in a way that you wouldn't do if you were being an assistant to some columnist at New York Magazine who's going to ask you to find links or something like that. You go work in Venezuela, you're going to learn about the oil business. You're going to learn all kinds of things that are terrifying and real, and that's what the job is about. It's also more fun, and you won't have to worry about all kinds of things that you have to worry about in the States. So that's the one question I think I know the answer to. So
awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Really quick before you go, who gave you access to those emails? Just kidding. I'm silly, Matt. I'm silly.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, again, it's not really a Scooby-Doo mystery, but you know how it is. But
awesome.
But thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, take care now.
Bye.
Thanks to your audience. Bye.
All right, guys. I'm going to go to some of the comments and then we'll move on to news stories. I hope you learned a little bit more there. I really tried not to ask. I didn't want to ask questions that he's been asked already a couple times, like in other interviews. So I try to ask some different things there. Let me go to some of the comments here and then we will go to the next story. Start at the top here. Shout out to Sandy M for becoming a member. Thank you so much. We give you a big whoop whoop. Joe says, I followed Matt since after Occupy Wall Street, and he has not wavered once. He's a strong ally to the First Amendment, freedom of press, as well as speech. Free the media. Thank you so much, Joe. JB says, I wish we had a YouTube files. Me too. Me too. Hey, new projects. Thank you so much for the super chat, Landrew. Thank you, Sabby and Matt. This isn't about politics. It's about truth. Thank you for hard work, Matt. Subscribe to Matt's Substack as I do. Well said. Thank you so much, Landrew. Thank you, Fick. Assange was trapped by Obama, indicted by Trump, and continued under Biden. Both parties hate free speech. That's a good point. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chris. Maybe bringing in someone to work on Twitter files whose main project could be exposing DNC like Bree or someone else. That's a good point. Well, it's interesting. It's good to hear that Aaron's going to be helping him too. I think that'll be awesome. Thank you for the super chat, Zach. Matt has made it very hard for the pretenders to maintain their grifts without rapidly losing credibility with their herds. P.S. Koldorf is a leftist. Thank you so much, Zach. And thank you, Chris. Love Matt Taibbi. Thanks so much. I'll go to those comments on Rockfin. Go ahead and get those. Thank you so much for the tip, Scott Johnson. Thank you, Jim says $5 for Sabby and Matt. And I think there's another. Yep. Thank you for the tip, Roger. That guy's NHL dad should pay for it. Reporters hit with crowbars. God damn. So the evidence was so damning, the Dems couldn't refute. So they pivot towards his motives, saying that it is slanted to favor GOP. Thanks so much, Roger. All good points. All good points. Okay, we are moving to this story about the state of Ohio suing Norfolk Southern, and rightfully so. I'm going to show you this. Actually, this is a screenshot. I'm going to show you this screenshot here from Case Study QB first. And then I have a couple of clips to show you because we did talk about the symptoms that people are experiencing in East Palestine, but those symptoms have actually gotten worse. So we're going to get into that as well. But shout out to Case Study QB for this. Case is always on it. You can always count on Case. It says Ohio sues Norfolk Southern. They want them to do this: pay for full cleanup of accident, pay for all environmental damages, company to pay for groundwater and soil monitoring for years to come, and compensation for economic losses in East Palestine and other areas. There's a couple of things I would add to this. The big one, give everybody in East Palestine, Ohio, Medicare for all. Everybody in the, they can use the same excuse that Libby, Montana actually used. Well, Libby, Montana, it was asbestos. But with East Palestine, Ohio, obviously, this was the hazardous waste that was dumped because of the train derailment. So I would say give everyone healthcare, free healthcare in East Palestine, Ohio, just like Obama did actually for Libby, Montana. And then 2, cover everyone's medical bills because this is not their fault, right? And then 3, and this one would be costly, but I think the people there deserve it. All of these people in this community now that own homes, their homes have decreased in value because of the chemical spill, which means their houses are probably worth nothing now. So what they should do is go back and see what their homes were worth before the train derailment happened, and all those people should be compensated. Now, I know that's a lot of money, but when I show you what's happening to people there, I think you'll understand why I'm asking for the things that I'm asking for. So I definitely agree with the lawsuit, but I do think they should ask for more than what they're asking for. So here is the Ohio Attorney General announcing the lawsuit. Listen to this.
This afternoon in Federal District Court for the Northern District of Ohio, the state of Ohio has sued Norfolk and Southern over the February 3rd derailment and subsequent toxic spill that occurred near the village, in the village of East Palestine. This is a 53 count complaint, 106 pages, and looks to hold Norfolk and Southern responsible for their actions. The train derailment caused the release of over 1 million gallons of hazardous chemicals. And it endangered both the health and area residents of the area residents and Ohio's natural resources.
I just want to pause here for just a second. I have been a little bit behind on the other train derailments. I'll try to get up to speed on those by next week. But there was another train derailment in Arizona today. It's been like honestly, YepX, yes, you've actually kept me up to date on this on Twitter. It seems like every morning I wake up, there's another one. They've been happening across the country, you guys, not just Ohio. There was also another one in Ohio near Cleveland. So I'm going to have to go through that thread to go back to all the other ones because there have been multiple ones since this incident happened. So we got to keep up on these things.
Among the things we note in the complaint are Norfolk and Southern's escalating accident rate. It's up 80% over 10 years. And that's a concerning number. At least 20 Norfolk and Southern derailments since 2015 have included chemical spills. This derailment was entirely avoidable. And I'm concerned that Norfolk and Southern may be putting profits for their own company above the health and safety of the cities and communities that they operate in. We're seeking injunctive relief, civil penalties, costs, damages, court costs, and maybe more importantly, a declaratory judgment that Norfolk and Southern is responsible. We're looking for recovery of costs and damages under CERCLA and Ohio law for our emergency responses, and payment of damages under the common law for our natural resources, property damage, and economic harm to the state and to its residents.
And they can afford it. One of the shareholders for Norfolk Southern is BlackRock. This company can afford to pay all of that, all of it.
We're looking for repayment of costs under common law, including present and future costs incurred by the state in responding to the emergency, providing public services, and preventing future harm to the environment and public health, restoring natural resources, and abating the nuisance. Of course, civil penalties are available under statute, and we're also seeking repayment of court costs.
Okay. But like I said, you guys, those homes are worth nothing now. Like it's just anytime you have like an environmental disaster like this, these homes are worth nothing. So these people, like their property, like where is their wealth, right? If they wanted to sell their home a year from now, they probably wouldn't be able to. Like these homes it's nothing, nothing. The water is poisoned. The air is apparently still poisoned. I'm going to show you some symptoms in just a second. And I think that there's just no excuse. And I want to remind you, the president still has not been to East Palestine, Ohio. This is like a joke. None of these cities where these train derailments have happened with carrying hazardous waste, the president has not been there. This is not okay. And I don't care if this is a district that voted for Trump. That's besides the point. People don't deserve to suffer and to deal with these symptoms because Norfolk Southern wanted to cut back labor to save money. And that's what this really is about. I've talked to the railroad workers on here twice, actually 3 times technically if you count worker strike back, because I interviewed 2 of them there. They've all said the same thing. This has been a problem going back to the 80s, is what they told me. So I want you to hear about some of the new symptoms that are happening in East Palestine, Ohio. We've talked about the headaches. We've talked about the constant runny nose. Some people feeling like their eyes are burning. We've talked about that, but it gets worse.
I got a neighbor, and right now he's puking blood because he works right there in the main part of it.
People are going back to work because they have to.
They need that money.
See, this is how it works in a capitalist system. Even people who are sick. So one of the symptoms now is people are puking blood. That is never good. So how do you fix this? And those people who have symptoms, they're still going back to work because, like he just said, they need money. Isn't that sad? Let's go on.
I like these big boys in Norfolk. They're sitting behind a desk or sitting at home, kicked back in their chair, enjoying themselves. Because they got the money coming in.
Yep.
Do they care about us? No, they don't even care about their own employees.
Nope.
Sometimes a disaster is so overwhelming that it shocks people out of their political corners and brings really big problems into focus. That's what it's like in East Palestine. I grew up in this county. I lived 2 counties south on Route 7. The last time I was in East Palestine was for the Sweethearts Dance in 2007. I came back to find out what happened when a nearly 2-mile-long Norfolk Southern train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed and was detonated in spectacular fashion on the edge of town. We've been here for over a week. We've seen national figures and camera crews come and go, but what gets lost in so much of that coverage is that the people here still have a ton of unanswered questions. How safe is the air and water really? Who, if anyone, has the juice to square up with a $55 billion company that treats disasters as the cost of doing business? And will anyone step up to lead this time?
Do I have to wait until I have cancer or my kids are sick before you guys are going to do anything?
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah. Care to do an interview?
Yeah, I'll do one. My name is Luke Glavin. I live a couple blocks from here on Alice Street. We're in East Palestine, pretty much right ground zero for where the train derailed. Friday night, my wife and I were playing Call of Duty, and we heard some banging around, and we didn't know what the heck it was, so we paused it. We come out here, and it was a spectacle, really. I kept telling my wife, "Oh my God, this is big. This is bigger than we're going to even ever imagine."
The train derailed on the edge of town late at night on February 3rd. 5 cars were carrying toxic vinyl chloride. Left alone, the damaged cars would have gone off like a bomb. So officials on the scene did what's being called a controlled release. A mushroom cloud of toxic chemicals filled the sky, stretching out for miles.
It was like hundreds of miles, like that shit was out there. And I was just silent for a moment. That feeling, when people are gonna suffer or something's horribly wrong with this.
2 days later, government and company-sponsored tests declared the air and water safe, and a mandatory evacuation order for residents in a 1-mile radius of the derailment was lifted. Minutes later, the trains were back on the tracks. And in the days and weeks since, residents have gotten very few answers to their many questions. So Luke, walk us through what communication has been like of really important information after this derailment.
I'm going to give you the shortest answer possible. There isn't any. I mean, really, from Norfolk anyways. You're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they can't even give you the answers to some simple questions that even a little bit of research on Google can give you.
They're not.
That's 100% true. All you have to do is Google it, and Google will tell you, well, they cut back regulations. They tried to save money. There's supposed to be at least 2 engineers on those trains. They cut back and made it just 1. You know, this could have been completely avoidable. And I really do feel like because of where it happened, I feel like the administration in charge right now just does not care. Because I feel like if this did happen in, like, say, Philly, I feel like Biden would have been there. So that's where we are now. That's what I meant when I was, talking to Matt earlier about partisan politics. This is where we are now.
Talking, they're trying to protect themselves. So,
Yep.
I mean, but they need to at least let us know what's going on,
Norfolk Southern has been carrying out most of the major operations since the disaster, hiring contractors for the cleanup, the testing, everything.
When they did the test, I was actually crying as the team walked through my house because I said, there's no way in hell I'm the only one smelling this right now.
I noticed the smell right away. I could smell a cleaner smell.
They said they didn't smell anything at all.
So you've had a test at your home. Who did that test?
That was CTEC. That was the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health, the company that Norfolk contracted with.
It turns out the initial testing used to justify the claim that East Palestine's water supply was secure was conducted by a third-party contractor hired by Norfolk Southern in a way that didn't comply with the EPA's own testing standard.
You never let the company that poisoned you hire the people to come and test for chemicals. It's like, I saw a movie about this one time where the company brought in their own lawyers. Yeah, it's like, you never let that happen. Never. Of course, the residents, this isn't their fault, but that should have never happened. You never let that company who poisoned you get the EPA inspectors. You just can't trust it because, of course, they're not going to report everything. They're going to try to cover their ass. That's just how it is.
It begs the question of why the company that caused this disaster was ever charged with handling the response in the first place.
Why the fuck would you let Norfolk do that? Why would you let them clean up their own mess?
There you go.
They have every reason to just cover it up.
This is the only thing that I've received from Norfolk so far. This is just a little pamphlet just telling us about what they've done. 3,150 cubic yards of contaminated soil and 942,000 gallons of contaminated water. And that's been the narrative since this started was, guys, it's okay. We've got this. We're cleaning it up.
We've made a lot of progress on environmental remediation. We've dug up 4,600 cubic yards of soil and collected 1.7 million gallons of water.
We got the wildlife officers out there every day checking our creeks. Everything's dead. Nothing comes around. We used to have birds. We used to have all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Just remember, the company is always going to protect itself. And that includes some of the employees. Now, some of the employees are speaking out, but for the most part, that gentleman, he's the CEO. Of course, he's going to protect the company. The company is not going to say, yeah, we totally messed up. This is all our fault. They're going to try to make sure that they protect themselves, not the people.
Water that's bothering her, or is it something else? She's not manufacturing. She's sick. I've had her at the emergency room 3 times.
I'm being exposed to something in my house. The doctor diagnosed me with contact dermatitis due to chemical exposure.
I try to walk 3 feet into my house. I start feeling like I'm literally about to black out. We're not dumb. They think they can just throw a bunch of science words around and then just expect us not to question it. I just really like to know what exactly they're doing at this point in Norfolk.
Props for the Queen shirt, by the way. I love Queen. Props for the Queen shirt. But yeah, these things that they're talking about, these are the things that are happening that you can see happening on the outside. Like the person who said they were coughing, their friend was coughing up blood. That's something that you can see on the outside. What we're not seeing so far is what's happening to the inside of their body. What happened to their lungs? What happened to their stomach? What happened to their liver? What happened to their intestines? See, these are the things that we need to see. And so for the people who have been admitted to the emergency room multiple times, the doctors should be checking for internal damage as well. Sometimes when you have these conditions that that surface on the outside, like the one who was mentioned, the contact dermatitis, sometimes that can be a sign of something that is going on inside of your body. So it's important that they should be checking them for that. I sincerely hope they've all had scans, like a lung scan, or I don't know. I don't know, what the medical facilities are like there, but there could be intestinal damage. Let's go on.
Personally, I'd like to know why people are getting sick with CDC symptoms and why they're just not taking it seriously. I mean, they match the symptoms identically, and they're just still like, oh, those are unrelated.
So we are in the press box of the East Palestine High School auditorium, the last of a 3-day event with national political figures coming through here, the first being Trump, the second being Pete Buttigieg, and now Aaron Brockovich.
I can't tell you how many communities feel that these moments are the biggest gaslight of their life because you experienced it. You have symptoms, but you're going to be told it's safe. You're going to be told not to worry. Well, that's just rubbish.
And they're going to tell you that so you can get back to work. That's why they're going to tell you that it's safe. Oh, yeah, it's safe. Come on back. Get back to work. We need the labor. JB says, what about the developing brain of children? That's a good question. It's a good question.
This is all happening as the Environmental Protection Agency takes over the next phase of the cleanup process. In practice, that means that Norfolk is still leading the day-to-day operations, while the EPA monitors their progress. But the EPA plans to use its powers to force Norfolk to foot the entire bill for the cleanup. And if the company fails to finish the job, the EPA will do it themselves and invoice Norfolk for 3 times the original cost.
I want you all to know that we are holding Norfolk Southern accountable for putting this community in harm's way.
The EPA has a spotty track record of showing up, rushing to say everything's fine, then leaving people without the support they really need. We saw it in Flint, and we're already seeing some signs that it might be happening here. Recently, the EPA said that their own testing shared that the air and water near the crash was completely safe. But Texas A&M researchers, using the same data, found elevated levels of 9 pollutants that could be linked to serious long-term health risks. For residents, all of this can feel like a repeat of how Norfolk Southern has been handling the response in the last few weeks.
That's right. So even for people who may not have symptoms now, that doesn't mean they may not have issues 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 1 year from now. Like those chemicals can just linger and cause problems later on. This is why I say the company should pay them full damages immediately. There should be no, well, we're just going to try to pay for the cleanup damage. If you are suing the company, if the state is suing the company, you get everything that you can out of them while you can. Because they are really ruining people's lives here. Like this is their health. Everything out of them while you can. And if that means, and it's sad, I'm pretty sure most of the people there don't want to move. It's their community. Especially if they grew up there, they don't want to have to leave their community. But if they feel unsafe and they want to be able to move, moving costs money, they should be given. This is why I said they all need to be given checks. All of them. They should be given money to be able to move if need be. Because like I said, these houses are worth nothing now. No one is trying to go there and live in East Palestine now.
The fact that they gave Norfolk that entire responsibility was just beyond me. I just don't know. I hope the EPA can make it right, but I did talk to several federal EPA people already that didn't know. They just didn't know.
Which I think they should have just been blatantly honest with us,
They should have been blatantly honest, but they're going to try to cover their tracks. Mary brought up a good point here. They're not. It's like when George Bush dropped the ball with Hurricane Katrina. Exactly. So we've seen how the presidents have responded before in these types of events. Now, with Hurricane Katrina, at some point, they did relocate them. I know there were people that came to Columbia. This was when I was at University of South Carolina. There were people that came to Columbia, South Carolina that were from New Orleans. They were relocated because of Hurricane Katrina. But I feel like this town is being completely ignored by the presidency. Like he doesn't even care. It just nothing. I'll play a little bit more and
You
then
should
we'll
have just come right out in the beginning and said, hey man, this could be a while. Hold on because you don't know what's going to happen.
And that's the uncomfortable truth. No one really knows what the long-term health effects of all of this will be.
When you burn vinyl chloride, it forms dioxins, which are itself their own very hazardous form of chemical and are very, very persistent over long periods of time.
That's Emily Jeffers. She's a senior attorney at the Center for Biological Diversity. We asked her about the EPA stepping in and what they can realistically promise residents.
What are the full costs and how long will it take us to know what they really are?
That's a good question because no one knows. It's going to be years and years and years before we really understand the full costs. A lot of these cancers don't manifest themselves right away, so the harms that folks might see is not going to be readily apparent. The best case scenario is that Norfolk Southern pays a ton of money to these folks.
They owe us property value. They owe us our health. They owe us 5-10 years from now when things are going on.
I just don't know
That's what I was saying. They need to pay them for all of that.
how these people can't have any type of sympathy. Bust out the checkbook, man, and start paying people to clean this shit up the right way.
So this is important for people to know. I'm going to move on to the next story because of the sake of time, but I did want to say that next time it could be you. Next time it could be your neighborhood. Just told you another one happened in Arizona today. So right now it's East Palestine, Ohio, and a couple other places, but next time it could be you. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip, Stargazer. Great interview and news. Have you thought of inviting the Real News Network on your program? Which one? Chris Hedges from the Real News Network. He's been on here a couple times. Let me know. Gonna go to. Okay. All right. I got you, Eric. Thank you for the super chat, Katie7. So much more enlightening than BJG's, but what the Libs interview. Oh, sorry. So much more enlightening than BJG's, but what the Libs interview. Matt Taibbi is one of the few legitimate journalists working today. Great job. Thank you. I will say, just keep in mind the interview that Bree had with Matt. If you saw the YouTube version, just keep in mind that's not the full interview. So I think the full segment, I think CJ said the full segment is on Patreon. So just keep that in mind. Tristy says, spot on, Sabby. This is not amount of money that can make up for this bankrupt them. No amount of money that can make up this bankrupt. No, it just isn't at this point. Dwayne, there was one in Washington State too, Sabby. So that's another one I didn't know about. Thank you for the super chat. Yep, X. I listened to Lucky Burrito's stream, and an East Palestine Mutual Aid organizer reported that even Canada is being affected. Their snow smells of chemicals. And Ohio is not on the border of Canada. Thank you for the super chat, Zach. The government is still pushing bloop with astronomical injury rates. I have to be careful. They and these jab crusader groups mass censor. There's no hope for East Palestine. Zach, is that you on a surfboard and a guitar? Is that you? You are multi-talented, Zach. Thank you for the super chat, Graham. The movie you mentioned was that Dark Waters. Yes. Thank you. I couldn't remember the name of it. And thank you for the super sticker, Some Days. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to our final story here. And then we're going to do call in tonight. So stay tuned for that. Our final story. So if you have not seen this viral interview with Briahna Joy Gray and Bethany, I forgot your last name, hun. Hold on. Mandel. This interview with Briahna Joy Gray and Bethany Mandel about woke culture. You are going to see it now. So Bethany Mandel is a co-author of a book called Stolen Youth. So she really gets into this idea of wokeism. We're going to actually go back after this video and I'm going to show you where woke actually came from. And I think you'll see how it's been used differently today compared to how it was before. But this was a very telling moment. I think we need to talk about it because I think Bree did something really great here where she said, or she did ask her, can you define that? And I think that was an important question to ask because it does mean different things to different people. And you'll see what I mean after I show you this clip and I show you the history of the word woke. So let's go ahead and dive in here. Get ready for a fun time.
In their new book, Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation, authors Bethany Mandel and Carol Markowitz make the argument that progressives are waging a battle on the American family and indoctrinating youth in politics, education, medicine, mental health, and even entertainment.
The authors say that this is no longer a healthy or happy environment for these children. Co-author of Stolen Youth, Bethany Mandel, joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Bethany.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So help us understand, what do you see as what's going on with the left or progressives' attack on youth today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the crux of the argument of the book is that there is sort of a woke reimagining of our society, and it's happening in a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas of our lives. And there's been a lot of attention, justifiably, on corporations, in media, but there hasn't been a lot of focus, if any, on sort of the youngest generation. And so Carol and I wanted to talk a lot about, how this sort of interferes with childhood as it's happening in America right now. There's a lot of chatter about what's happening on college campuses, but not enough about children.
So a lot of people right now are paying special attention to this supposed mental health crisis among young people, especially teenage girls, self-report, a lot of misery, frankly. I'm seeing people blame various things. A lot of people say it's social media or their cell phones. I think obviously the mental health was going to be impacted by COVID and everything being shut down and kids having their social lives and their school lives so disrupted for so long. Does your book talk about the sadness that young people are feeling and identify a culprit and hopefully a solution?
First thing, I think Robbie got new glasses or different glasses. Two, I think he brings up a good point here about social media. And when we were locked down, at least my state was locked down, it was like that was all you had at that point in time was just social media and online conversations, which is not the same as having conversations with people in person. And yeah, there was a lot more time being spent online. I would say so. Like TikTok got way more views during that time than it did previously. So I think, when you are on social media all day, and I've said this before, that can have a toll on your mental health. There are different things. Facebook, everybody's having a great family and a great life. Everyone on Facebook is having the perfect day. You guys ever notice this? Like people aren't on Facebook saying, so-and-so just punched me in the face, or they're not on Facebook saying like, my husband gets on my nerves. I wish he would just go away. Like you don't see those things for the most part. You see like this picture perfect life, and it can make some people feel like if their life isn't that way, then they should try to make it that way, not realizing that people are posting their best selves on Facebook. Whereas on the other hand, on Twitter, people just let loose, right? Like Twitter, on the other hand, can also be negative in a different way because it's people coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of trolls like on Twitter, and people can just so sometimes it's good to take breaks from social media. So I thought that was a good thing that he brought that up. It can have an effect on your mental health.
It does. So, I mean, there isn't an easy answer. And I think that the reason why, especially young girls, are feeling as distraught as they are is multifaceted. And a lot of what you hit is behind their sort of ever-growing misery. But there's another sort of aspect that I think hasn't been talked about enough, and something that we hit on a lot in our book. And it's sort of this martyrdom complex that a lot of young people are encouraged to adopt. And so, you kind of gain points among your peers when you talk about your mental illness, about your victimhood. And so one of the examples that I heard from
Is that true? I don't have kids. For those of you in the chat that have kids that are old enough, I would say if you're in the chat and you have kids that are at least, I would say 10 and up, is that true that kids gain points from their peers by, I guess, bragging about their victimhood, like she said? Let me know in the chat. I'm curious.
From a very wealthy mother in Silicon Valley of, very, very upper class child, definitely in the top 5% of children in the world, honestly, as far as luck goes. And she said that she felt like she had to be a victim in some way in order to gain credibility among her peers. And so she sort of adopted a mental health condition that she didn't necessarily have. And a lot of that was egged on by TikTok. There's been a lot of these kinds of things that have been written about as far as Tourette's syndrome goes, but she sort of just adopted this victimhood and then sort of it spiraled. And when you tell yourself something enough times, this is sort of cognitive behavioral therapy. When you tell yourself something enough times, it manifests in some truth. And so we talk about that. We talk about the loss of resiliency for this generation, but the depression that a lot of young people are facing, again, it's mostly young girls, has a lot of culprits.
How do you negotiate this idea of an outsized victim culture and people claiming mental health issues that don't really exist with a book and a discourse that's talking about the mental health issues that people do suffer and kind of framing kids as in a crisis? I mean, there's a kid on a milk carton on your book in a way that obviously points to the fact that there's something real there in your view. How do you disaggregate what might be characterized as a mental health crisis caused by a focus on mental health crises and the idea that we should be perhaps less attentive to the idea that people who say they have mental health crises are in fact experiencing mental health crises?
We'll get to that point in just a second. This is a good question. Thank you so much for asking this question, Mafik. Why are kids on social media in the first place? They should be playing outside. Oh, Mafik, maybe you're from my generation. I grew up playing outside. And it's really interesting. I never see kids outside. I never see kids playing outside these days. I think there's a lot of time spent on cell phones and maybe video games. But we have video games too. Like I love Nintendo. I had those things as well. But I think I'm gonna star this question, Eric. That's something we really need to think about, you guys. I want us to think about that. Why are they on social media in the first place? But let's get back to the mental health issue. Sorry.
So it's hard to disentangle the two. And how do you know when a child is experiencing a genuine mental health crisis versus that of a child who is sort of perpetuating their own misery in order to gain credibility among their peers? And it's hard to know where one starts and one stops. But there is a line between having an honest and frank conversation about the mental health crisis that children are facing, in large part because of what we did to them over COVID, and sort of the perpetuation of victimhood. And so that's sort of the line that we try to address in Stolen Youth of where does one start and one stop? But the answer isn't necessarily clear, but what we address as sort of the way forward is to not idolize and to not sort of amplify mental health crises as something that gains you credibility points. It's something that is not good, that requires sort of treatment and conversation instead of sort of social cred.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And it's a phenomenon that I have observed, that I've discussed with people in my life who are educators and mental health professionals. I definitely never deny the reality that there's a certain kind of cultural cachet that's emerged of kind of hierarchies of oppression, let's say. Yeah. But I've also seen a lot of people across the political spectrum express frustration with that. So I wonder if you could get into how you see this as a war of the left against the right, because framing it that way, when I think this is a broad concern that a lot of folks have a problem with, does kind of also recreate this kind of victim paradigm where you have people saying we're being under attack by the left instead of kind of coming together and trying to resolve what I think is a broadly understood phenomenon.
This is a good question, because I'm wondering this as well. Like, why is this framed? I haven't read the book, but why is this framed as a left-right issue if we're talking about mental health? Like, I don't understand. Like, it's when she's saying that, like, some children are saying that they have mental health illnesses that they don't necessarily have because they feel like, you know, they need to do this to impress their peers. How is that a left-right issue? I wonder about these things sometimes. Eric said left-right cells. Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder about these things sometimes. Like some of these talking points I feel that are being framed as like left-right are not actually left-right. I think some of these issues affect everybody.
And so in this circumstance, there's a lot of things that are sort of a right versus left conversation, but this is not one of them. And I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of people for whom this argument resonates, and it's not just right-left issue. We hope that, you know, parents of all political stripes will pick up the book. This is sort of a woke reimagining that is very, very, very far left. Only 7% of Americans consider themselves very liberal, and probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke. And so, you know, when we talk about traditional,
what does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
That's true, Ocean. Sheena, that's true. Sabby hasn't been inside a classroom in a while. That is true. It's been a while. I don't know what the kids are doing these days, you know? But yeah, it has been a while. But let's go back to the define woke part. I'm sorry. Because this is where things go south. The interview's going great so far.
Pick up the book. This is sort of a woke reimagining that is very, very, very far left. Only 7% of Americans consider themselves very liberal, and probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke. And so, you know, when we talk about traditional,
what does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Uh-oh. So this is where before I even finished the rest of this interview, as soon as I heard that part, I was like, uh-oh. But I'm glad that she did ask that question, because I've seen interviews before where people bring up woke, but nobody asked that question. No one asked them, can you define what woke means? And I think this is what made this interview go viral, because well, you're going to see, like, she bombs here. She just, it's not good. Robbie comes in for the save, but it's not good on her part.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression.
So that is not how we would define it in the Black community. Just FYI, we would not define it that way. Like I said, it's taken on different meanings over years. This goes all the way back to the 1930s. I'll show you that in just a second. But let me finish. Let me let it finish.
Sorry, it's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Yeah, look, time.
I mean, it's one of those things that I mean, everybody is weighing against wokeness. We do some of it on this show as well. It's definitely something, you know what it is when you see it, but
is it wrong?
It is.
Will you define wokeness then?
I would say it's the tendency to punish people formally or often informally for expressing ideas using language specifically that is very new, that no one would have objected to like 5 seconds ago. So it's easier to come up with examples like, you know, punishing people for using the wrong pronouns or identifying structures of that kind. I would say it's the system of doing actual censorship.
Robbie comes in for the save. Like, Robbie is like, oh no. Robbie's like, I gotcha. So maybe this was, maybe she was Robbie's guest. I'm not sure. But Robbie comes in for the save. He was like, I got your moment. So you see, Robbie had no problem saying, although, again, I would say originally that's not what it means. That's not where it comes from. But the term has seemed to take on a different meaning, like in the past couple of years or so. I don't know what happened. I feel like it was co-opted. I really do. But you see how quickly Robbie was able to just jump right in and say that. And Robbie didn't write the book. And I think the reason why people were pointing fingers at her is because she's the one that wrote the book. So, yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean. Doesn't mean that he never defined it, but he came in with something. You see what I'm saying? Like he came in with something to what he thinks it actually means. He at least came in with that. Whereas I think she did get stuck there, but I don't think she was expecting that question. I really don't. There's something else that she posted as well too on Twitter that I do want to show you that she uses for the excuse as to why she tripped up there.
Let's take that example. Bethany, you're talking about small children. So is the argument in your book that a 5-year-old is coming home from school, not using someone's pronouns and getting castigated by their teachers or family for not being sufficiently woke? Or is there some other kind of phenomenon that you're pointing to more specifically that's affecting young kids in your book?
So with the example of a 5-year-old, one example that one of my friends just posited on Twitter, her 5-year-old came home and said, I like girls. And so that means different things to different people. For an adult, and sort of what the adults were sort of telling that child and what they understood they were sort of framing for that child was that it's okay to be gay or straight, and more of a sexuality question. Whereas for children, it's more, I like girls and I like boys. And the way that this is sort of targeting children comes up a lot in children's literature and children's movies. And so there's a lot of sort of hypersexualization of the content that's being fed to children that isn't necessarily age appropriate. And I would argue probably 95% of parents would argue that they don't want their children at a drag queen story hour or reading a book about sort of one book was How Mamas Love Their Babies, and it was about how sex workers are wonderful parents, and sort of tries to foster acceptance for all different, jobs or professions. But for children, that's not an appropriate message to hear, that there are women who are dancing for money and that's how they that's how they support their families. And so this is sort of the forced conformity that a lot of people on the left, sort of on the woke side, are sort of forcing on parents and children to say, this is acceptable content. And if you do not think that this is acceptable content, you are therefore a bigot.
So how did this come to be? Like, I feel like this is such a big issue in the past year or so. Like, why is this such a big... What is happening? I don't know. I don't have kids. You're right. I have not been in K through 12 system in a while. It's been a while since I've been in there. Like, why is this such a big deal all of a sudden? Like, what is happening out there? Tina Turner used to refer to, for the women who dance for money, she used to refer to them as a private dancer. She did. She said, I'm your private dancer. That's what she used to call it. But I don't understand why this is such a big issue within the past year all of a sudden.
Bethany, I saw that tweet that you mentioned. It was someone who said, I was recently at my friend's son's 8th birthday party. I was chatting with one of the moms, and she said that her 5-year-old daughter came home from school and said she likes girls, and that her teacher said that's okay. So the response seems to have been that's okay, without more editorializing about whether it's sexual or not. Although you quote tweeted it saying, talking about sexuality with young children weird again, make that weird again.
Yeah.
Without more, it does seem like that's just that's fine and let it go, and we'll see if she grows up and is actually lesbian or she just likes hanging out with her friend Crystal. So what would you prefer a parent do? What do we think is the appropriate course of action there to tell a kid it's not okay to like girls?
No. So the rest of that tweet said, the mother was complaining that this is kind of constant messaging that's happening at the school. And this is something that a lot of parents are feeling very frustrated about, that it feels like a death from a thousand cuts. It's just constant messaging about sexuality. Is
that true? For the parents in the chat, is that true? Is that what's happening in K through 12 right now, where it's constant messaging about sexuality? Let me know for those of you who have kids, because I don't hear about these things. Like, even for my friends that do have kids, I never hear these conversations from them. They have never said this to me. I don't hear about it unless it's on like independent media or mainstream media. That's usually where I hear about these things. I see different answers in the chat. No. Most people are saying no. Donna said yes. Leroy said that's false. Cuquita said no. I'm getting a mixture of responses here. Ted said, don't know, my kids are out of college. There you go, Ted. Empty nester. Thomas said, no, not true. I have kids in elementary school. Okay. Brady said it's reactionary. Danny, you have nieces and nephews, Sabby. Yeah, but they don't talk about, I have not heard any of this. That's why it's like, all right, we'll continue.
Children for whom they have two moms and two dads, single parent households led by mothers, single parent households led by fathers. That is an appropriate conversation to have with a child, that adults have different sexuality and all of that is okay. And it is okay because it happens. This is life. But there's a difference, and this is the line that we were trying to draw between having adults have conversation about their own sexuality and assigning a sexuality for a child. And this is where we draw the line, where we say, don't sexualize children because they do not yet have a sexual identity.
Yeah, just in this example, it doesn't seem, from that person's tweet thread, it doesn't seem like there was especially more. And I think that that's part of the concern. I would agree that there's a lot of messaging in school that I, as a leftist, don't agree with, that I find to be quite conservative. But I think there's an interesting question to be had about what role it is for parents in their home to offer correctives, and whether or not we're actually advocating in school for people to be told, no, it actually isn't okay when these kinds of issues arise, because to your point, some people, the world is what it is, and people are gay, and people do have gay parents in schools, and people do have single parents in schools, and all those kinds of things. But I really appreciate your generosity in talking about this tough subject with us.
Yeah, I don't know, you guys. Like, I really don't, like, I'm telling you, like, outside of like media, the news, I don't hear about this at all. Like, my friends have never said this to me, like those that have kids. But Bethany did provide a bit of a backstory. Now, this is the part that's pretty funny, because she wanted to make excuses as for why she felt she couldn't define woke. She said a bit of a backstory. Wait for it, ladies and gentlemen. Just before we went on air, Briahna Joy Gray on a hot mic, I heard her demeaning parenting in general in colorful and nasty terms, stating parents only have kids in order to perpetuate their own narcissism. Robbie responded, there are some good ones and some bad ones. So that prevented you from answering the question about what? I don't understand. So what? I've gone on to shows before where I'm backstage, like you guys can't see me, but the host can see me before they let me come on. There are going to be things that you hear sometimes. So what? But what does that have to do with you answering that one question? I don't understand. She goes on to say, as a mom of 6, including a newborn, this threw me off just a bit. Not an excuse, just a reality. I'm human. As for wokeness, here's an actual definition. A radical system suggesting that our institutions are built around discrimination and claiming that all disparity is a result of that discrimination. It seeks a radical redefinition of society in which equality of group result is the end point, enforced by an angry mob. So let's talk about where woke came from, because I think it's important to share this. Listen to this. Now, this is from What is the History of the Term Woke from the Conscious Communicators. Listen to this, and I'm going to show you a short article that also gives a little bit more insight into the backstory.
Here's another question for Janet. Okay, Janet.
Ready.
Conservative political figures have been quoting Martin Luther King Jr. as of late, and also co-opting the term woke as a narrative, which actually is a term from the Black community, originated in the Black community, like many other terms. So what's the history of the term woke?
The phrase stay woke actually has been around for quite some time. It emerged in African-American vernacular English as early as the 1930s. In fact, it was first uttered, so we believe, in a recording by the blues singer Leadbelly. It was at the end of a song about the Scottsboro Boys.
Shout out to the person who mentioned Scottsboro Boys. Did I star that? Yes, Austin, Scottsboro Boys. Exactly. All the way back to the 1930s.
In 1962, a New York Times Magazine article titled "If You're Woke, You Dig It" by an African-American novelist named William Melvin Kelly talked about the appropriation of African-American slang by white beatniks. So throughout the early 2000s, though, the term took on various associations, from some literal admonitions to fight, sleep, and stay woke, to a warning to watch out for infidelity. The term that we think about most now, and the way it morphed into what we think about most, happened during the Ferguson protests following the murder of Michael Brown. The term then became a hashtag within the Black Lives Matter movement. Appropriating it as a pejorative is just one more way that some have tried to diminish, dismiss, and disavow the reality of systemic racism. But that's the history of the term.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Again, like I always think it's good to, when we talk about things, I like to talk a little bit about the history of it. Like, where did it come from? I think that's important for people to know. And then this article here, which I also think is important. Whoops. I'm not going to read the entire article, but there's one piece that I want to highlight: where woke came from and why marketers should think twice before jumping on the social activism bandwagon. This was written in 2019, but this piece right here, first used in the 1940s, the term woke has resurfaced in recent years as a concept that symbolizes awareness of social issues and movement against injustice, inequality, and prejudice. But popularity has diluted its meaning, and the idea has been cynically applied to everything from soft drink to razors, attracting criticism if too liberally applied. Being woke was originally associated with Black Americans fighting racism, but has been appropriated by other activist groups, taking it from awareness and Blackness to a colorless and timeless phenomenon. So just a little bit of the backstory there for you guys, so you understand, where that's coming from. So I think that's important for people to see. But yes, that video did go viral on Twitter, and I think MSNBC covered it as well. Case Study QB has a clip of it. Yes, MSNBC also covered that segment. So yeah. So I don't know. I don't know, you guys. Like I said, like I don't hear about these things, but I also don't have kids. That's why I asked you guys. That's why I asked you. Let me go to some of the oh yeah, okay, you're right. I see the time, Eric. We will do call in tonight. I forgot to put it up there, Eric, but we will do call in. I'm going to take a quick break, and Eric, I think we got a couple of chat still left to read as well. I'll be right back and we'll start calling. Oh, we can't hear you. Whee! I can beatbox while Eric's waiting to get his sound on.
How's that? Is that better?
That's great. Yeah.
Hey, all right. It's good to be heard. All right, here we go. Yeah, sometimes this setup does this thing where StreamYard loses track of the mic. But yeah, all right. This is the part of the show where we give our Sabby a little break before we go into call-in here. I'll put the call-in link into the chat. I think that'll work. And so you can bring up call-in on your browser, or you can put the app on your cell phone. And Danny, why is a blue shirt heresy? No, because it's Eric T. Red. Yeah, well, we can't all be tied into one side or the other. Like I always said, it's not about red or blue. It's about up and down, and worrying about the billionaires first. All right, let's see what we got for some chats. And then, after Sabby's bit of a break, she'll come back for another minute, and then we'll transfer over into Colin, where we want to hear from you all what you think about things like the Matt Taibbi interview, about what woke. You can come tell us what woke means to you. All right, so Delthea put in to JB Font, I bought the Lazy Book because of your show. Yeah, they were on Sabby and JB's show. They mentioned the book about lazy, and JB's talking about on his show, and then he said, yes, oh snap, awesome, Delthea. This little conversation there in the chat. All right, from Mafik, why are kids on social media in the first place? They should be playing outside. It's. One of the things that I put in and noted that since all the COVID lockdowns and whatnot, like I feel like they made outside and dealing with other people dangerous. It's like everything's dangerous now. And from Cloudy's Guides now, can't go outside. You might find a community. Yep. And from Scott Wolvie, progressive woke is a way to divide and distract. Yep, I feel you there. It's this whole culture war. It's a whole, it's a whole using the culture war because that's what's within the Overton window. That's what's allowed to be discussed and even better fought about. Because as long as we're all talking and fighting about those things, we're not talking about the top 0.1 percenters, the billionaires, the people who really run things and what we're going to do about them. As long as we're all fighting about what woke means, we're not doing that. From JB Font, if they don't want their kids at a drag queen story hour, then don't take your kid. Real simple. Yeah, totally. It's kind of like, why are people so concerned about other people's kids when it's the other people's kids have parents. It's just another thing to fight about. The other thing I want to say about like drag shows and drag queen story hour, it's like, yeah, drag shows can be sexual. That can certainly be a thing. But that doesn't mean that that's the only kind of presentation, the only kind of interaction that a person who does drag can do. And so this idea that drag queens can't have a kid story hour that's perfectly appropriate and age appropriate, is really just kind of bigoted. It's really, it's acting like being not heteronormative is inherently sexual. It's really, it's perfectly possible for drag queens to do a kid appropriate interactions. It's really it's the other people who have the problem with sex. I'll put it that way. And from Lori Christensen, thanks for becoming a YouTube member. It's always appreciated and helps the cause. This super chat from Zach. Brain dead, censorship, cocoon, NATO left adopt issues that get associated with the overall left. We'll only hear what sounds reasonable, and so don't push back. Yeah, there's a whole question of what is left, what's the real left, and a whole lot of things that are being sold as real left ain't left. And from Sweary Frary, thanks for this super chat. Wonder what she thinks of 2-year-olds wearing shirts that say "Chicks dig me" and such. Yeah, I think there's a whole part of this that's there's a whole lot of sexualization of children that the heterosexuals are doing. There's this whole history of the little girl beauty pageants and things like that, and it's we don't seem to have this same this same kind of excitement and all that over that. Yeah, so we're going to be jumping into call-in soon, and definitely do get ready for that and let us know what you think. Yeah, so the Taibbi interview was great. I think Massachusetts can kind of claim him as a good one, as he grew up here. I don't think he still lives in Mass, but I believe he grew up in it. Yeah, he's a real journalist, not a so-called journalist, and that means kind of really trying to play it down the middle and stick to the facts and not get caught up in the whole political left, right, and all this nonsense, right?
Which is supposed to be what journalism is. I mean, that's what, if you go back to like the Walter Cronkite days, right? Like that's what journalism was.
Stick
right?
to the facts, right?
Yeah, just stick to the facts.
Great interview, by the way.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's about that time to go to call-in, guys. So what are we talking about tonight? This is episode 90, Matt Taibbi interview recap. Let's chat about the interview with Matt Taibbi. Of course, also, sometimes people call in, they talk about other things as well, or other segments that we covered tonight as well. So that call-in link is pinned to the top of the chat. So I will see you guys over there, man. Over there. I'll be back live again tomorrow night on RBN and on here. Interesting stories tomorrow. Oh, God. We have more to discuss about this banking situation. And something else that has been brought to my attention recently. So, yeah, we're doing it. All right, guys, we're going to head on over to call in. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Uh-oh. Oh, there it is. Keep up the fight.